Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are getting into our third mock draft. Early off-season, Sickos only 2025 mock, right? So we're going to expand a little bit more now. So we're going to go to 9 rounds on the mock draft. We're going to fill all of the starter positions. Again, this is Superflex with 3 wide receivers and a flex. So that ends up with 9 starters here, right? Obviously, kicker, defense, whatever you guys do with that. But 9 position player starters in your starting lineup. We really recommend this format to everybody. If you haven't moved to Superflex yet, maybe we'll make some persuasion videos or some, content around trying to convince your league mates to go to Superflex because it is so much more fun. And this channel is directly related to trying to, provide information and content surrounding Superflex leagues, how to draft in different formats. And so we're going to highlight another mock, 10 teams, 3 wide receiver. If you're here for the first time, or you're just checking out the channel, or you're still, fiending for some fantasy content and you're here, please hit that subscribe button for us.
I'm curious to pick your brain on Bijan Robinson versus Amon-Ra St. just because typically you push up wide receiver in the first round over a lot of these guys being the format. So curious where your head's at with those two.
Yeah, and so this has been a little bit different for me prepping, right? Because this year it was kind of undeniable that the running backs were more valuable than the receivers. Obviously, Chase was unbelievably good. So, he was kind of the outlier at receiver. But Bijan is in a spot now where he got off to a little bit of a slow start. But then after week 6, it was just huge week after huge week after huge week. So it's just something that if he is able to continue to score this many points going into next year, when they made the quarterback change, he was even better than he was before. So with Michael Penix, I think a full off season and Bijan so heavily involved in the passing game, he's such a monster in the red zone in terms of scoring touchdowns. And you can kind of see here that, he wasn't even necessarily super involved production-wise in the passing game over the last month of the year. So he was putting up these numbers basically just on the ground. And I think another offseason, if Kyle Pitts ends up getting traded, there's already some rumors about that. There might just be even more volume for Bijan in the passing game. So I think that also could develop into his game, checking down to Bijan, who is an excellent weapon out of the backfield. So you got Mooney and London kind of taking all of the wide receiver targets. We'll see what ends up happening at tight end. And I think Bijan is going to even expand his passing game role beyond what it was over the last half of the year. So I know he was getting a ton of work on the ground and he was scoring like crazy. So it's like, when you're producing that well on the ground, it's not necessarily needed as much through the air. But it's just hard to see a situation where Bijan isn't going to be a possible league winner. So for me, that's why I push him up. Now, I should not hate on Amon-Ra St. though. I mean, I still have him as a first-round pick, even in a 10-team Superflex league. And he's just the model of consistency, right? I mean, he coming in, we knew that his upside maybe wasn't as much as Jefferson, or his upside wasn't as much as Chase, or his upside maybe wasn't as much as A.J. Brown, even though A.J. Brown didn't, play as well. But he just will produce over and over again. He'll have spike weeks, but even when he's not doing well necessarily, right, he's going to just continue to produce double-digit scoring weeks, and he's going to give you a solid floor with the blow-up potential. So, I mean, you see over his last 3 seasons, it was 7, 3, and 3 amongst receivers. So that's just a level of consistency that's hard to ignore. And he's on an awesome offense. So I know Ben Johnson leaving is going to be a little bit of a question mark until they figure out who their offensive coordinator is going to be. But that's why I kind of have Bijan over Amon-Ra at this point in the offseason.
And in the second round, this one's going to be a fun debate all year long. Is Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Nabers. I see you have Nabers over him right now. Do you think that's going to change? What are your thoughts with those two?
It very well could be. We'll probably dedicate a full video to those two and maybe either add A.J. Brown or Nico Collins in it, depending on how ADPs start to shake out later in the offseason. But for right now, I have Nabers above Thomas just because of the volume. I think the quarterback play was just so atrocious for the Giants, and he was still productive. He had 3 different quarterbacks start during the year, or 4, I guess. He played with Tim Boyle for a little bit, I think, too. But the fact that he was able to rack up 1,100 yards And I know he had a big week in week 17 where he kind of put up a lot of this, but he had 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns as a rookie. I was a naysayer coming into the year because of the quarterback play, but the fact that he racked up 170 targets, I mean, that's not something I ever thought was in the realm of possibility. I mean, you go and look at target leaders from rookies, and he's now the target leader all time from rookies. So it's like, I just didn't expect that. And he even missed 2 games and still put these numbers up, was number 6 in 15 games with horrible quarterback play. I think that they're going to improve that, whether it's with a veteran or in the draft. And, you know, Brian Thomas Jr., it's not like he was playing with this awesome quarterback situation either. Trevor Lawrence got hurt and Mac Jones came in, and he was almost better with Mac Jones. You know, out of the bye week, we talk about these rookies really taking a step forward out of the bye week, especially the top end talents. And I mean, look at what he did after the bye week. I mean, it's just 10, 12, 14, 13, 10, 11 targets, double digits in 6 straight games. He finished with 1,280 yards and 10 touchdowns. So he was actually better than Nabers, 4 overall. So I don't blame you if you want to go with Brian Thomas Jr. over Nabers. But in my opinion, you know, he played the full 17 games. So his per game totals were less than Nabers. But I just think, you know, the volume and the safety that comes with Nabers is something that I'm going to gravitate towards as we continue to roll through the offseason.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page for now. Moving into the third round, I guess sticking with the theme of the Falcons, what do you think for Drake London with a whole year of Michael Penix, based on what you've seen so far?
Yeah, so I was a little worried about London with Penix just because it didn't seem like they really got off to a good start, right? It was like 5 for you know, that he had a touchdown in this game because Penix, this was Cousins' last game, and you know, London didn't score a ton through the middle half of the year, and then the last game of the year it was 10 for 187 and 2. I mean, he went all the way off, and I know that was after the end of the fantasy season, so you know, maybe we're seeing an asterisk a little bit next to that 5 overall. But you know, I think this is somebody that I'd be very willing to move up depending on off-season news. So, you know, if Penix is looking really good and London is getting rave reports out of camp, I know it's going to be his 4th year next year. So, you know, we'll see how this plays out. And I know this probably looks low because he was getting drafted ahead of this coming into the year. So, and then he finished number 5. He had a very productive season. So, you know, I don't know that I'm going to move him over Nabers and Thomas, but maybe he's the one that we should be discussing in that tier, even ahead of AJ Brown. So, you know, there's just a little bit of the uncertainty at the quarterback spot, but as we get closer to the year, I think we're going to hear more and more about how Penix is looking good and how London is going to be the top target in this offense.
Yeah. And then in the 4th round, I absolutely love these quarterbacks. Purdy, Dak, Drake Maye. Like, this is why I typically like to wait. And I remember texting you maybe a month or so ago saying my strategy, I think, for next year is I'm going to take Brock Purdy, which is waiting a little bit. Then I'm going to wait again. But just seeing this and how, you know, teams 4 and 5 are built out, very intriguing. And obviously Dak got hurt. That was unfortunate. But Drake Maye, we assume he's going to have added weapons, offensive line help. We know what Purdy is. He's very reliable. So I love these guys here.
Yeah, I think it's a good area to attack your QB1. And again, this is going to be draft dependent, right? This is kind of where we would slaughter guys and where we see them going. But there's a good chance that these guys turn into 3rd round picks. So, you know, depending on your league, you need to know how they're going to draft, because if all of these guys are going to be gone by the end of round 2 or the beginning of round 3, then obviously you have to adjust your strategy. But this is a very good range of quarterbacks. And I think we saw the volatility of quarterbacks like 10 through 15 or 13 this year, right? There was a lot of guys in that area that didn't end up doing that well. It didn't end up being league winners. It didn't end up taking that big step into the top echelon of quarterbacks. And so that's why I push these guys down into the 4th round a little bit. It is nice to be able to get one, but Dak got hurt and just wasn't very good to begin with at the beginning of the year. And they're going to have a offensive regime change now. So, you know, I don't know. There's a lot of mystery surrounding Dallas's situation right now. Purdy obviously got hurt again, but he was really good when he was playing, right? So obviously if he's coming in healthy, I think the health of Brandon Ayuk will play a big part in whether we like Purdy. I think if they re-sign Debo, again, that will help Purdy. But if Debo moves on, Ayuk starts the year out, it's going to be hard for me to trust Purdy. I don't like situations that are bad to start the year because I don't want to start 1-3 no matter what. I don't want to have to claw my way out of a hole all year long, even if it looks better later in the year. So that's just maybe a little bit more risk averse early in the season for drafting. But I do like this section of quarterback a lot. And if you don't have a quarterback yet, this is an excellent time to get in.
And in round 5, my favorite player, Chris Olave. Is this finally his year?
Yeah, I mean, well, he obviously struggled with concussions. That was his main thing. Ended up missing the whole year after his second concussion, which I think was smart. They weren't playing for anything big, so just get him geared up for next year. I don't know. I think the quarterback situation with Carr, if he's back, is good for Olave. I mean, they do like to attack down the field. Shaheed is coming off an injury, so I don't think he's necessarily going to be ready for the beginning of the year after his ACL tear. So maybe Olave gets off to a hotter start there. But that was my main thing is like Shaheed was out targeting Olave before he got hurt.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with Derek Carr because Carr just likes to chuck it deep. So, not taking necessarily the 10, 15-yard routes that Olave really excels at because mid-level targets is really what Olave is best at. So it was kind of Shaheed deep, Olave midfield, and Kamara close. And Carr just wasn't choosing him as much as he should have been. So I don't know. On Olave, obviously I'm down on him a lot compared to what we were kind of thinking last year. He was a 3rd-round pick in our format this year. And you see even like his target numbers, he had 14 the game before he got hurt and then 10, but only 2 double-digit target games in here. He had a concussion here, so that one doesn't count. But the rest of these games, it's just inexplicable that he's not getting more targets as the one. And so coming into the year, again, it'll be one of those things where maybe we're a little bit more hyped on him and he'll move up. But again, I think a lot of these guys that are ahead of him at receiver are either established or have really high upside. And so it's going to be hard for me.
In the next round, Cooper Kupp, man, I think it might just be time to let go. He feels a little bit too high for me, at least. Yeah,
with Kupp, right? Obviously, you're saying that because look at the end of season production here. I mean, he was atrocious. He had 0, and then he had like 3, and then he had 3. And he even in the playoff games,
too.
They just got knocked out. So even in the playoffs, he was wholly uninvolved. And I know the weather played a bigger portion than we would have liked to admit in the Philly game, but it just, like you said, it just feels like the bottom fell out for him. But if you look at before that, I mean, he has multiple double-digit target games, and he was actually really productive. So I'm not sure what happened. And I have him pretty low. I mean, this is in the late 20s amongst receivers at this point, and so maybe it's a thing where he comes out like we kind of pushed him down coming into the year, and then he comes out and immediately has a 21 target game.
Yeah.
So, we could talk about this all off season, but then he comes out and McVay decides to just load him up with work. Then it's like, well, crap, we should have obviously had Kupp higher, so he's going to be a tough one to rank. He's going to be really tough. Some people are going to be higher on him. Some people are going to be lower on him, and we'll find out kind of, first week of the season where he kind of should have been, I guess. But overall, I think end of 6th round is about the time where you'd have to get in on him. I mean, you could wait and take some higher upside guys that you see later in the draft, but he's not going to fall much more than 4 or 5 wide receiver spots from this.
Yeah, I think if he does get off to a hot start, he could be a good sell high candidate, but getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But in the next round, DK Metcalf, you think he ever gets back to the 1? Do you think it's Jason's to lose? Like, it was just kind of a weird, not fall from grace because he's still a very strong player, but a little bit of surprise based on how the year started, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he was so highly touted early in the year, and then his targets fell off. He got hurt. And in those 2 weeks, it was like all JSN, right? JSN just kind of took over. And then it was the bye week. And again, JSN's still a young player. Second year, was behind Lockett a lot last year. And they go into their bye week, and then it's like, oh, the younger player, the skilled player, the talented player, the guy we've been touting forever comes in and starts taking over as the main target. So I don't know. A lot of these targets that you see for Metcalf here felt very forced. I mean, you see the low catch rate. on the weeks he had high targets, right? It's 9, 4 catches, 6, 4 catches, 7, 3 catches. And it's like 2 touchdowns after the bye. I don't know. That's supposed to be his calling card. So I was a little bit worried about Metcalf. I had him in a league, in a 3 wide receiver league, and I had to stop playing him. I mean, he just was not reliable enough. And if he wasn't going to score, he was just kind of worthless. So I think he could get back to being more productive. I think it's going to be interesting to see if Geno Smith is still there. So there's a lot that could be changing in Seattle. I think the offensive coordinator is still locked in, but we'll see how this situation unfolds. I definitely prefer JSN, though, to Metcalf. That's not even going to be close for me.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you there. And then in round 8, we've got a couple notable Detroit Lions, LaPorta and Jameson Williams. I guess you kind of mentioned it with St. Brown, but what are your thoughts in this post Ben Johnson area with those two guys?
I think whoever comes in is going to be, kind of fitting to the personnel. So I don't think they're just going to go away because Ben Johnson is gone. But, the scheme might be a little different. The end arounds that JMO just takes to the house, maybe that's not such a big part of the offense. Letting him throw a pick on your most crucial drive of the year, maybe that's not part of the offense. So, maybe the opportunity share is more traditional and that leads to less explosive plays. But overall, I think that Jameson Williams kind of took over as the number 2 early in the year. And then I think we saw a transition back to LaPorta as the second option. If you really look at LaPorta's player card here, right, he was like not getting very many targets. And then he got hurt. And then it was just right back to kind of what we had hoped for, even throwing in a 10 target game in there, right? He was much more consistent with his catches. And then that also played into the playoff game. He had 6 receptions in that game too. So I do think LaPorta is somebody that's going to be interesting to try and evaluate here, right? And JMO's role was also consistent, but it was, not so much this like heavy 9, 11 targets early, and then he kind of got uninvolved, and then it was a little more consistent, but the production was kind of variable depending on if he caught a long touchdown. Yeah. So I think, as the number 2 wide receiver, explosive plays, and LaPorta a little bit closer to the line and getting a little bit higher volume than we saw early in the year should be the expectation.
Last round, Jeudy, we know he had an incredible stretch there with Jameis Winston. Was that a flash in the pan, or what do you expect from him and I guess that quarterback situation next year?
Yeah, so I don't expect Dorian Thompson-Robinson on the roster. Okay,
or on any roster.
Yeah, on any roster. Nobody can be successful at the wide receiver position or at any pass catching position with Dorian Thompson-Robinson as the quarterback. He is literally the worst quarterback in NFL history. Go and look at his stats. He's got the worst touchdown interception ratio, one of the worst completion percentages, one of the lowest passing or one of the lowest yards per attempt in NFL history. He is, without a doubt in my mind, the worst quarterback in NFL history. So Jeudy's not going to have to play with him. So it's going to go up from there, right? And Jeudy was looking like a top 10 wide receiver with Jameis Winston behind the controls. So this is kind of a compromise on that, right? I mean, he's still outside the top 30 wide receivers. This isn't like you're drafting him to be a stud. If it doesn't work out, you can easily move on. But I think it's worth taking the shot here because if they do figure out the quarterback situation, if it is Cam Ward or it is Shedeur Sanders or they go and get Kirk Cousins, like this is going to be a player that can be very productive. He showed it this year. It was kind of a breakout year for him in terms of his overall production, right? He finished as wide receiver 12 with 1,230 yards. So note, like the touchdowns didn't really come, but look at how many targets he got and how productive he was. And I know a lot of it came with Winston, but if there's any sort of consistent level of QB play, I think he's going to be worth the pick. All right, so that's the 9-round review there. We picked out some players, and now we're going to talk about our favorite teams and then a unique build. So, Matt, which one is your favorite team?
I went back and forth a little bit, but ultimately I settled on Team 5 just because I've got 2 wide receivers in a 3 wide receiver league that legitimately can finish as the 1 and 2. You've got Jacobs, who just the entire Green Bay offense ran through him the second half of the season. Purdy, who I already mentioned, I liked. Breece Hall, who was consistently ranked 2 or 3 on the board last year. He's still an explosive player. We'll see what happens with New York. Obviously, a lot of moving parts. Marvin Harrison, I would expect to be a lot more featured in this offense this year. They were throwing to McBride almost every play, it seemed like. And I really like McBride, but I think just it didn't work the way that they had Harrison playing. I know he still had a very productive season from like a rookie perspective, but maybe not what we had hoped for from a fantasy perspective, because he was getting pushed up into like the end of the first round in some 12-team leagues. And then Stroud, really like the player. Obviously, he had to deal with injuries to his receivers this year, but he's still got Nico. I'm confident that they will do something about a number 2. I think he should have a decent bounce back. LaPorta, obviously a very good player. And then Pollard, like, I wasn't super high on him coming into this last season because they were saying he and Spears were going to be 1A, 1B. But when both were healthy, especially in the beginning of the year, Pollard was a stud. So I think, with some later round picks, maybe some upside flyers, I can build a really strong team out of this core.
Yeah, I like that team a lot too, how that turned out. And I think that maybe speaks a little bit too to the drafting in the middle of the draft and being able to be kind of nimble there and not miss out really on any tier or any talent, and I like to draft from the middle. So I think it's good that you liked that team. I think also getting Chase at 5, right? That's another reason why I love Superflex is like you get the opportunity to kind of draft more players because I think quarterbacks will go and you kind of get an opportunity to build the team how you see fit. My favorite team was team 8. I know that's maybe a little bit surprising, but the Bijan Puka combo at the top, I think, is not something that's going to happen very often. I think Puka, as the offseason rolls forward, is going to get pushed up even higher than this. I've already seen him ranked at 3 amongst receivers. I don't know that I'm going to push him above Amon-Ra St. Brown and CeeDee Lamb. So maybe one of those guys ends up in this spot. But it's just hard for me to see that and be like, okay, I'm not going to be able to make this team work. I feel like you get a stud at running back, you get a stud at receiver, and then you're just kind of off to the races in terms of playing the board. So Baker obviously was very good this year. I don't know if he's going to stay there. I do think they're going to add a weapon if they don't bring Godwin back, but I obviously have Godwin on this team too to stack with Mayfield. That was my thought anyways. And then James Cook was like 18 touchdowns this year. So he was established and scoring a lot and just overall very explosive player, good in the passing game. So I felt really good about kind of my top 2 running backs on this team. And then we talk all the time about waiting for your second quarterback. If you get a guy you like, if you get a guy that you think is kind of going to be the cornerstone at the position, and wrapping up the quarterback position with Darnold in round 9, I think is really, really good. We'll see where Darnold ends up signing. It doesn't sound like he's coming back to Minnesota, but if he does sign somewhere in an advantageous situation, like, not to say this is an advantageous situation, but if he goes to the Jets and he gets to work with Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall as his top 2 weapons, and they draft either a receiver or like a Harold Fannin Jr. at tight end and get him another weapon there, I think that could really work out well for Darnold. So if it's something like that, I think that's going to help him and this team be very successful. The last team we want to talk about here is team 2. So unique build here, right? Everything else is kind of not stock builds, but you have some early quarterbacks and fill in the receivers, then get running backs or get a couple running backs, fill the receivers. Like, it seems more standard than team 2, right? You have 2 quarterbacks in your first 3 picks and a tight end. So you have no wide receivers, no running backs after 3 picks. And that's very risky, I feel like. But the players you got there, I think, could make it worth it, right? If you have Kyler have better chemistry with Harrison going into the year, and if they draft a secondary wide receiver that can kind of come in and be productive, like a Buka, like we saw in the rookie mock that we did, I think Kyler could take a step forward as a passer. I feel like we've been saying that forever, but maybe this is the year. And the rushing keeps his floor really high, so it's like he is going to be a top 6, 7, 8 quarterback because of how consistent his rushing is. But if his passing takes a step forward, I really think he could end up in that top tier of quarterbacks. So I think he's always worth taking a shot on if you can get him this late. The receivers, we went with some old guys there, and that's kind of where the situation you put yourself in. If you wait, you're just scrambling at receiver in a 3 wide receiver league. So that's how I drafted this. That's how my mindset was for this team, is it was like, get McLaurin, who feels safe with Daniels, get Adams, who just has been productive and feels like he's safe in an automatic start when he's out there. And then Cooper Kupp, like I know you don't love the Cooper Kupp pick, and maybe I could have gone Flowers or somebody with more upside. But when you're searching for a receiver like this, when you're scrambling, I'd prefer to go for some floor. And I feel like, the floor did drop out on Kupp over the last 5-6 games of the year, but I don't think that that's going to be the case all year next year. So that's why I decided to do that with Kupp. And then the running backs, obviously just best available and try and put it together. I don't think running back is necessarily as important in this format, but what do you think of that team?
It kind of scares the crap out of me. If I was to leave a draft with this team, like I would be sweating at night with just these 3 guys that are all either 30s or pushing 30s. I love the Chuba pick. I really do. Najee, like you feel like you can use him as a starter, nothing too flashy. Tyrone Tracy, I really like too, but there's no guarantee that, they're not going to bring in another young running back who could potentially beat him out. I don't know, man. I do like a lot of these guys, but it makes me nervous.
Yeah. And so, it is nerve wracking, and, you could go down the draft board and try and pick, if you hit on sleepers on a build like this, that's kind of how you end up winning your league, though, because we see it year after year that whoever has the best quarterbacks ends up winning the league a lot. We had that in our main league this year. It was Jaden Daniels and Sam Darnold, both top, like Jaden Daniels, obviously top 3, and Darnold was finished top 7. So it's like, it's just, if both of those quarterbacks hit and you have Bowers, who is going to be good, high volume, if any of these guys hit and you're able to just piece together the rest of your team, you can really have high upside in a way that other teams won't necessarily have, unless, it's a Bijan Robinson where your projection's really high with a guy like that. But, Lamar over Baker is also going to be, 5, 6, 7 point projection difference on a weekly basis. So that's why I think it's interesting to draft like that, because there are going to be teams that do that. And then they're going to hit on guys like JSN from last year. They're going to hit on a Cortland Sutton from last year. They're going to hit on a Chuba Hubbard. And it's all of a sudden, it's like, how did this happen? And it's because they invested their top end capital on quarterback. So interesting build. We'll keep the,
Well, maybe next time what we can do is we can build out like a all risk team and an all floor team or something, kind of talk through those. That would be fun.
Yeah, I'm all for it. Also, any suggestions, if you're still with us, any suggestions that you want to hear us talk about, man, drop them in the comments below. But yeah, we can build like an all risk, and we're going to keep going through all different types of builds and formats for the offseason. So stick with us through that. And we look forward to continuing to bring you that info. So, all right. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully it continues to keep your mind in the fantasy football space and deep into the offseason. So I look forward to talking to you in the next one.
Later.